Jake Morrison had always been terrible at reading people, so when his new roommate barely spoke and kept to herself, he figured she was just introverted. The housing crisis on New Geneva Station made strange bedfellows of everyone, and he was grateful to split the rent on the cramped two-bedroom unit. His roommate called herself Kira, which seemed human enough. She was tall and willowy, always wearing long sleeves and high collars that covered most of her pale skin. Her eyes were an unusual shade of silver, but Jake had seen weirder fashion choices in the outer colonies. She paid her half of the bills, on time, kept the common areas spotless, and never hogged the bathroom. As far as roommates went, she was perfect. The only odd thing was how she never seemed to eat the food she bought. Jake would see her return from the market with bags of groceries, but the refrigerator remained mysteriously empty. He assumed she ate while he was at work at the freight yards, loading cargo ships bound for the inner systems. 3 months into their cohabitation, Jake had developed a comfortable routine. He would come home exhausted, wave hello to Kira if she was in the living area, grab a beer from his section of the fridge, and collapse in front of the holoscreen. She would nod politely and retreat to her room, where she would remain until the next morning. It was a perfectly civil arrangement. Until the night everything changed. Jake had been working a double shift, helping to load an emergency medical supply run to the mining colonies in the Kepler system. The work was brutal, but the overtime pay would cover his portion of next month's rent. He stumbled home well past midnight, his muscles aching and his mind foggy with exhaustion. The apartment was dark, except for a faint blue glow emanating from under Kira's door. Jake assumed she was watching something on her personal tablet and tried to be quiet as he made his way to the kitchen for a late dinner. As he opened the refrigerator, he heard a sound that made his blood freeze. It was a wet, tearing noise, followed by what sounded like satisfied sighs. The sounds were coming from Kira's room. Jake stood motionless, his hand still gripping the refrigerator handle. The rational part of his mind tried to explain away what he was hearing. Maybe she was eating something messy while watching a horror movie. Maybe she had a medical condition that required special feeding procedures. Maybe he was just too tired to think straight. But then he heard something that shattered all his reasonable explanations. It was the unmistakable sound of something large being consumed, followed by a deep, rumbling purr that no human throat could produce, against every instinct screaming at him to mind his own business. Jake crept toward Kira's door. The blue glow was brighter now, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. He pressed his ear to the door and immediately regretted it. The sounds inside were no longer trying to be quiet. There was a wet, slithering noise, like something massive moving across the floor. The tearing sounds had intensified, accompanied by what could only be described as feeding noises. But these were not the sounds of any creature Jake had ever encountered. His curiosity overrode his common sense. The door was slightly ajar, and Jake found himself peering through the crack before he could stop himself. What he saw defied every assumption he had made about his quiet roommate. The thing in Kira's room was not human. It was not even close to human. The creature stretched nearly the entire length of the room, its body a sinuous mass of midnight blue flesh, covered in bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with that eerie blue light. Where Kira's head should have been was something that belonged in the deepest ocean trenches, with multiple rows of crystalline teeth and tentacles that moved with predatory grace. The creature was consuming what appeared to be several large chunks of raw protein, tearing into them with an efficiency that spoke of millions of years of evolution. Its feeding was methodical and strangely elegant. Despite the horrific sounds it produced, Jake stumbled backward, his mind reeling. Every interaction with his roommate suddenly took on a new significance. Her pale skin, her unusual height, ways she never seemed to eat normal food, how she always wore clothing that covered every inch of her body. She had been hiding in plain sight, but as the initial shock wore off, Jake realized something that surprised him even more than discovering. His roommate was an alien predator. He was not afraid. The creature in the room was clearly powerful enough to have killed him a dozen times over during the past 3 months. It could have easily overpowered him, consumed him, and found a new roommate to fool. Instead, it had chosen to maintain the charade, to live peacefully alongside a human, to split grocery bills and take turns cleaning the bathroom. Jake thought about all the small kindnesses Kira had shown him, how she always left the last cup of coffee for him in the morning, how she had covered his portion of the utility bill that month when his paycheck was delayed, how she never complained when he fell asleep on the couch watching old Earth movies, even though the sound probably disturbed her rest. Whatever Kira was, she had chosen to be a good neighbor. Jake quietly backed away from the door and retreated to his room. He lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what he had witnessed. By morning, he had reached a decision. When Kira emerged from her room the next day, back in her human disguise, Jake was waiting with 2 cups of coffee. She accepted hers with the same polite nod she always gave him. "Good morning, Kira," he said, meeting her silver eyes directly. "Good morning, Jake," she replied in that carefully modulated voice he now realized was probably not her natural one. He took a sip of his coffee and smiled. "I was thinking we should probably upgrade to a bigger refrigerator. Split the cost. You know, seems like we could both use the extra space." For the first time since they had been living together, Kira smiled back. It was a small expression, but Jake caught a glimpse of something grateful and relieved in her unusual eyes. "That sounds like an excellent idea," she said. Jake nodded and finished his coffee. He had always been terrible at reading people, but he was learning that sometimes the most important thing was not understanding someone completely, but simply choosing to accept them as they were, even if they happened to be a terrifying alien predator who was surprisingly good at keeping the bathroom clean. Chat controls, Sonnet 4.